Yeah, yeah, I'm ready. 1.21.
Hey, how y'all doing? This is MagMongoSlade, and today we're going to talk about the last piece of the audience series. So, to catch people up, part one was about TV ratings. Essentially, I talked about in that one, I talked about Disco Inferno and Vince Russo and all these guys who talk about WWE losing a lot of their audience over the course of 20 years or something like that. And I say, they had actually a lot more of an audience in the 80s. So you had, I don't know how many, you had like double or triple the numbers that are watching Nitro and Raw in the 80s. And then, that sort of died down, but, you had the change in television where you had cable started coming out of nowhere. Then streaming came out of nowhere. So you have more options to watch TV, and that means the ratings are going to go down. And then the next thing I talked about the 18 to 34 male demographic, about why it's so important. That usually they have a lot of disposable income, which they then spend on entertainment. But now that, males are struggling in the United States specifically due to, a lot of lost jobs and, stagnation and, the workforce and stuff like that, that is sort of is beginning to wane, and things are going to start now moving towards women. And then I talked about women, and I talked about how female fans used to be mostly groupies, how they mostly were there to have sex with the wrestlers, and then over time it just kind of grew as the separation between the wrestlers and the audience had to grow due to all the accusations, not of just of rape, but pedophilia and different things like that. Another one was paternity lawsuits and different things like that, and wrestlers being grabbed and made to feel uncomfortable. Roman Reigns and Randy Orton and such. So you had the female wrestling fan kind of had to change, and then you also had female wrestling fans kind of died down as they really boosted the 18 to 34 male demographic with high violence, high blood and stuff like that. So then now we're going to talk about the ultimate audience, which is children. And this one is going to be this one's going to hit a lot of notes because this is going to explain why WWE decided to go full PG. Also, why they shoot the show the way that they do. Now, a lot of people are upset by shaky camera angles, the cuts at inopportune times and things like that. But during this research, I think I began to understand why they did it. So in order to understand why they did it, we have to go all the way back to 1999. So what happened in 1999 is Lionel Tate. Most of you might not remember this, but Lionel Tate was a 12-year-old black boy who murdered a 6-year-old girl. And his defense was that he was mimicking wrestling moves that he had seen on television. This, of course, did not work. And Lionel Tate was found guilty of first-degree murder. His mother had rejected many plea bargains that would have had him avoid prison. But, they went to trial. He was found guilty as an adult. He had actually savagely beat the girl for several minutes. The injuries that she had could not have been, an autopsy found it. The injuries that she had could not have been done by accident, that he had intentionally beat on her. But that sort of pushed pro wrestling into the forefront, is that there started to be children who were imitating what they saw on television. And they started using it as defense, that, what they call the wrestling defense. So from that, you end up having, one of the big ordeals is you started having different voices speak up. When The Rock went to the Republican National Convention, I have 2 articles about this, actually. Both of them, one of them is from the South Florida Sentinel. It was August the 4th, 2000, where The Rock. Actually, let's go to the ABC article first. ABC News did an article on August the 2nd, 2000, where The Rock goes to the Republican National Convention, where basically they talk about who's going to run for president that year or whatever. And a man named Brent Bozell, who was the leader of the Parent Television Council, he, as a Republican, he definitely did not want The Rock there. And he says, he says that The Rock regularly uses profane language, demeans women, And then he claimed that 30 separate corporate CEOs had pulled sponsorships from SmackDown due to the PTC's lobbying against them. Said that the SmackDown is the most ultra-violent, foul-mouthed, and sexually explicit show on primetime television. And this leads to the South Florida Sun Sentinel argument, where Bozell, it says that he's a father of 5 with 4 boys, and he's sickened by the blood and the violence on SmackDown, and says that WWF targets children and that they need to change. This, of course, led WWF to talk about, they created the spoof, which they call Right to Censor. So if you always wanted to know where Right to Censor came from, it came from Brent Bozell, the guy who was sort of harassing the WWF about this case. So then you have, and then in this article, the Sun Sentinel article, it is said that 40% of the WWF's audience is between the age of 2 and 17. So this was in 2000. So the WWF sued the PTC, the Parents Television Council, after Bozell made defamatory comments. Essentially what Bozell did in other interviews is not only did he say that the PTC was responsible for a lot of advertising being pulled from SmackDown, some real and some imagined, he also lied and said that certain people pulled out of SmackDown when they were never sponsors in the first place. But he also began to say that WWE was responsible for crimes like with Lionel Tate. They basically said that, well, look at what Lionel Tate did. He was mimicking wrestling. And the WWF at this point in time was the only wrestling promotion in existence because WCW was dead, and so was ECW. So WWE sued him for defamation. And they won $3.5 million. In 2002, it was announced that they had won $3.5 million and a personal apology from Mr. Bozell after he linked the WWE to the deaths of 4 children and then passed this on to their advertisers. So this was obviously a absolutely grisly situation. And this was sort of the beginning of the end. Now, you may say to yourself, this was in 2002. It's like, okay, yeah, then what happened a couple of years later? Linda wanted to run for office, and then Chris Benoit happened. So now you have things have to change. Things have to change. So you had WWE basically being, attacked by advertisers and constantly in the media for different things, like wrestlers having heart attacks, wrestlers having concussions, things like that, constantly with the lawsuits. There were plenty of lawsuits that, things that you didn't see. There was a lot of lawsuits that weren't talked about. Some of WWE won most of these lawsuits, if we're being honest, especially the ones where, the CTE lawsuit, which we went through in a previous video. WWE won that lawsuit. They won a lot of the audits of, independent contractors, all that sort of stuff. But the idea of wrestling being bloody, violent, and not for children kind of stuck. And it really, of course, exploded with the Chris Benoit situation. And of course, from that, we had to change things. WWE began to be more child friendly. So in 2008, this is 2008, there was an article written by a guy named William Obar. And he talked about what does it mean to be a PG product. So he says that 8 to 12-year-olds spend $30 billion of their own, but they also influence $150 billion of their parents' spending. That on average, 8 to 13-year-olds watch 3.5 hours of TV a day. That in 1999, children under the age of 12 spent $28 billion. Teens spent $100 billion, and they influenced $249 billion of their parents' money. And of course, from this began all of the different campaigns to sort of stamp down advertising and different things like that towards children. So then we go to the FCC, because the FCC was what's created the TV ratings. And that there's a list of TV ratings here. And of course, there's like 6 of them, I believe. There's TVY, which is for children that are between the ages of 2 and 6. There's Y7, which is, for children that are 7 and older. Then there's Y7-FV for fantasy violence. So if, I would believe like fantasy violence would be like Harry Potter, I believe. And then there's G, which is suitable for all ages. PG, which is parental guidance, not suitable for all children. That's what WWE is. TV 14, unsuitable for children under 14. I believe that's what AEW is. And TVMA for mature audiences, unsuitable for children under the age of 17. So WWE chose to go with TV PG. Obviously, you're going to get better advertisers, especially over time, because WWE is more of a not just a family friendly product, but they started to make certain changes as far as their corporate structure and different things like that. The way that they shot the show, they no longer show a lot of Impact, so you would see different things for such as one of the things that I mentioned that I noticed, I should say, is that when Shayna Baszler sort of bends her opponent's arm and stomps it, they will sometimes cut right before she stomps the arm, so sort of to not show it. And it is aggravating. It is absolutely aggravating. And sometimes they'll cut certain moves so that, maybe they won't show how it's done. So maybe to sort of, and of course this is during this whole time, there was the always with the don't try this at home. So even though all of that stuff still exists, it's not good enough. It's never enough, if we're being honest. But wrestling became PG. And so then you start having this issue of, now wrestling's mostly for children. Well, WWE is mostly for children. AEW, they can do whatever they want. So, well, not everything, not whatever they want, but, they're starting to get hit with the band hammers and stuff too. Like, you notice they used to say the word shit a lot on AEW. Then they started trying to mute it. So, AEW is they're beginning to get hit with the hammer. WCW got it, ECW got it, WWE got it. You can't be too wild, too crazy. So then we come across what's going on with children in the modern world. So before we could tell the story of WWE's declining audience, to try to, put a nice little dovetail on this, beginning with the TV ratings, we have to understand it's not just WWE. In 2019, it was announced by the LA Times that Nickelodeon, a children's programming show or channel, had lost 60% of its audience in 10 years. Between 2010 and 2019, Nickelodeon had lost 60% of its audience. The Chicago Tribune said that Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, and other kids' channels saw rapid viewership declines as streaming grew. This was year over year. Cartoon Network fell 6.2%, Nickelodeon 15%, Nicktoons 12 to 13%, Nick Jr. 25%. Meanwhile, as of March 2020, Noggin, which I believe is owned by Nickelodeon, saw 11% month-over-month growth with a 40% jump in free trial signups. CBS All Access saw a 30% increase in kids programming, and Disney XD saw a 5% increase. And then you also had Disney launch their own streaming service around the same time. So then we go to Variety. So Variety, the same ones who talked a lot about wrestling before, and they said, "Oh, it's too cartoonish." So here's they had an article in July of 2021 that's entitled "RIP Cable TV." Pay TV households peaked in 2010 at 105 million. It is now down to 82.9 million and expected to drop to 72.7 million in 2023. The only two networks we need to pay attention to are TNT and USA. So the most watched networks in 2019, TNT is down 14%, USA is down 19%. And the only network that is seeing slow growth is the Food Network. Due to the pandemic, more people are watching Food Network. Well, Flavor Town wins again. So there it is. Children's television, which WWE ends up becoming over time due to A lot of the poking and the prodding from various individuals outside of wrestling that mostly didn't see. They forced WWE, even though WWE wanted the defamation case, they sort of forced them to begin making changes. And the changes actually came earlier than most people recognize. Like a lot of the blood kind of slowed down, a lot of the violence slowed down, and then over time they just began to add things. They started. Of course, they banned pile drivers after what happened with Stone Cold Steve Austin. They banned uh, things coming from the ceiling because of what happened with Owen Hart. Uh, Concussions meant banning steel chairs to the head and hitting people in the head with things. So you over the years you just had different things happening. That meant, okay, now we have to take that out. Okay, now we have to take that out. Now we got to take that out in order to be. It's not like they just decided to become PG overnight, just because of the Chris Benoit situation. It was they were specifically being linked to horrible stuff over and over again. Like WWE had gotten the wellness policy after Eddie Guerrero. Like they were making changes as they got bombarded with media. And then they started doing things, of course, that was outside of their purview, like sending The Rock to the Republican National Convention, like Lyndon McMahon running for office, and different things like that. And they had to change. So it sucks, but you can see that TV shows that are for children are going down, and WWE has put itself in that TV for children box. Now it's not Y7 or so it's not, which I believe Saturday Morning Slam was Y7, and you couldn't even throw a punch on that show if I remember correctly, and it was completely slapstick and stupid. But if you go back and watch old cartoons from like the 80s, like He-Man, there was no punching in He-Man. He would always pick you up and throw you. Like the X-Men animated series, Wolverine would pop his claws, but he would never actually use them. If there was actually a fight scene, Wolverine would, punch, or pick you up and throw you because it was a Y7 TV show. G.I. Joe, another, I believe it was also Y7. They turned all the guns into lasers, which is something that they did in the comics a little bit later that pissed people off, is that they started censoring guns and different things like that. So over the time, and now what used to be Republicans is becoming progressives as well. Progressives are anti-gun, so they want to blur guns in comic books and ban them. They took Elmer Fudd's gun away from him in the new Looney Tunes. They took away the sexual hello nurse from the Animaniacs. They do a lot of these unnecessary. Well, it's necessary, but it's basically the same stuff. You will learn if you pay attention to enough politics, you will know that there's this horseshoe theory where extreme conservatives and extreme progressives are essentially the same people. They just vote differently. Like there's anti-sex conservatives, there's anti-sex progressives. Angela Dworkin, was her name Angela Dworkin? Angela Dworkin, let me look that up. Yeah, so Angela Dworkin was a feminist who hated porn. So she would say porn is rape and different things like that. And, and then you have on the other end, you have the anti-porn conservatives who are glad Pornhub is going to have this MasterCard is going to ban Pornhub, and that's a good thing. So you have these people who on its face, it seems like they're natural opposites, but they're actually allies. So you had people in the early 2000s saying that WWE was too bloody. It was demeaning to women. It was yada, 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 which is stuff that you would hear today coming out of the mouths of Democrats and Antifa people and all that type of stuff. That is, oh, you're demeaning women and it's too violent. It's too bloody. They got guns and all this type of stuff, right? So it's basically just you've been sandwiched, over time in order to, not just to get advertisers, but you also, just to maintain your audience. Because you do have people out there that are trying to attack your advertisers. They also are trying to attack your audience, so it's just been a long change over time. But linking WWE to that Lionel Tate thing is horrific. It is absolutely horrific. And he wasn't the only one. He was just the one that became famous. But there were other children who really were just practicing wrestling holds, and they killed a friend, or they killed their sister, or killed their brother, or something like that. And you do kind of have to take that into account. And, you know, after sitting back thinking about it, putting some thought into it, I understand it. Like, man, I had what I had when I was a kid, man. I had blood and guts. I had heroes. I had, you know, Jake the Snake Roberts, Sick the Snake on Randy Savage, which is kind of traumatic if you think about it. And a lot of people were kind of like, oh, that's so traumatizing. Like, yeah, it kind of is. But it's been a long journey to bring WWE to PG. It wasn't something that they flipped on overnight. Because remember, John Cena wasn't always a PG character. But he just became sort of the face of the PG era. And now everybody's kind of stuck in that PG box. Just like, you know, the whole scripted promos thing. It didn't just happen overnight. It was a creation of years and years of working with TV networks. And, you know, they work with scripted television. You are not real, therefore you are scripted television. So, you know, you might as well have writers and different things like that. And I understand it. Don't have to like it, but I do understand it. So now that was it. I have talked about the audience. I've talked about the TV ratings. I have talked about men. I talked about women, and now I have talked about the children. So hopefully you guys can now understand more about different subjects and different perspectives, and have different things to look at when you're going to complain about a show. You can actually say, okay, maybe I understand why. And you don't have to like it, because I don't like it. But hopefully you just understand it. But thank you guys for listening. If you enjoy my work, also send me some money via Cash App. Hit the like button. Also hit subscribe button. Make sure you get notifications. Make sure you share this information. You know, let people know, like, hey, this stuff's not easy, man. Running a multi-billion-dollar corporation and then making personal mistakes, it's not easy. You know, so. But thank you guys for listening. Enjoy your day, and I'll talk to you guys later.